This week, I take you inside the way that applied functional scientists think about how your body moves during the assessment and when we train you. And we also use this for our own body because it involves a chain reaction. It involves the truths that the body gives us. And based on that information, which are based off of the principles of human movement, we come up with a strategy, and then we come up with techniques to implement that strategy, whether it's outright training you or if it's working to help you resolve a movement issue, or to what we're doing through this channel is helping you work towards achieving the fluid state, increasing your mobility and stability through movement, motion, chain reaction. So, the key to this week is real and relative motion. Now, bone movement can be measured in real space. For every joint in our body, we have two opposing bones. And the movement of those bones determine the relative joint motion, the pressure that's being applied to a particular joint. And that lets us know if there's an issue with the way you're moving. So that's why it's so, well, I would say easy. This is why we are able to train you organically. So every time I work with a client, and nowadays when I see you through Zoom, I'm always looking at how your bones are moving in real space, and that allows me to calculate the relative joint motion in the joint to determine if the right amount of pressure is being applied, or if you have that fluidity that's needed to keep you flowing and to, most importantly, prevent injury and to help you overcome injury relative to what we're working on, improving your mobility, stability, and strength. Three keys there. The Gray Institute calls the combination of mobility and stability mo-stability. So our objective is to achieve mo-stability while we develop strength. Before I go into today's movement, I want you to learn more about real and relative. Real and relative, I mean, we have, for every joint, we have two bones, opposing bones. And those bone movements move in real space. And their movement, depending on how fast they're moving and which one's moving faster than the other, or if they're moving at the same rate, it determines the relative joint motion. Now, the relative joint motion is calculated. So, we, in the lower extremities, are working with the proximal, closest to the center, and the distal bone. In this case, we're going to use the hip and the femur. So the hip will be the proximal bone, and the femur will be the distal bone. So I'm going to cover 5 ways to achieve internal rotation with the right hip. And so let's take a look at this model. Now, this bone, of course, will be the femur, and this is the hip. So if we take a look at the hip here, and if we rotate the femur in like that, where the hip complex or the pelvis is still, doesn't move, but the femur rotates inward, we create a relative joint motion of internal rotation. In the lower extremities, the relative joint motion follows that of the distal bone. Now, what happens if the distal bone doesn't move and the proximal bone moves? In this case, the hip complex or the pelvis What if the pelvis rotates while the distal bone is still? What motion do we create? We still create internal rotation. Think about it. Before, the distal bone, the femur, rotated inward with the pelvis being still. So that's the position. Now if we did the same thing with the pelvis, keeping the distal bone still, we'd rotate out like that. But if I move everything back, we still got the same position that we had before. So that creates internal rotation. Now the significance of the relative joint motion in relation to the opposing bones is it triggers signals for proprioceptors to fire. So we want to train those proprioceptors on how to fire properly, because that sends signals to the brain, and the brain sends signals to the connective tissue or the muscles on how to lengthen and shorten, or to load and explode, or basically control the bone movement. Now, that's the first two movements to creating internal rotation for the right hip. We can do the same thing on the left. Now, if we move both in the same direction, say if we go rotate to our left and your right, we determine which bone is moving faster. In this case, the femur is moving faster than the pelvis. So because of that, we have internal rotation. Now, if we move to the right and the pelvis moves faster than the femur, we still have a relative joint motion of internal rotation. Now, if they both move in opposite directions, it follows the pattern of the distal bone, in this case the femur, which in turn gives us internal rotation. So those are the 5 ways to achieve internal rotation within the right hip. The same applies to the left hip. Now, I don't expect everyone to grasp this concept fully. I just need you to understand that the pressure that's applied on a particular joint is based on the movement of the 2 opposing bones. So if you're having pain in your joint, then there's probably something going on with your chain reaction of how the bones are actually moving. So in our goal to achieve fluidity, it's important that we develop the right habits to keep all the joints tuned so that we can eliminate or greatly reduce the possibility of injury, and then also overcome injury. Now here's one extra one that I wasn't going to cover, but if you have the 2 bones moving at the same speed, doesn't matter which direction, they're actually moving at the same speed, which is very rare, there is no relative joint motion. How could there be? They're both moving at the same rate. So now you have a basic understanding of real and relative. We will cover real and relative a little more down the road, but you got the gist of it, the basis of it. It is hot out here, by the way. And when I learned real and relative, we were talking about every bone in the body, and it was quite complex, and it took me a long time to grasp the concept of real and relative. Matter of fact, I was uncomfortable with it for a few years after learning it, because it was so much material to absorb. I couldn't really fully understand it until I was actually applying it in my practice. So hopefully this little summary of real and relative gives you a better picture or broader picture of what we're trying to accomplish by sharing these gifts with you, so that you can tune your body to achieve that fluid state. So today we're going to do a lunge matrix showing the internal rotation of the right hip. Now we'll start off with our hands at shoulder height. And as I step forward, I'm going to bend a little bit, but at the same time, my hands are going to rotate to the right. Notice what I just did to that right hip. I just created internal rotation of the right hip. So, now, in this case, I'm using an authentic driver, which are my hands, to create the speed of my hip or the pelvis. So the pelvis is rotating outward or externally rotating. However, that is still creating a relative joint motion in the hip of internal rotation. Now, if we want to use that movement to load the rear butt even more than what we're doing by just lunging forward, we can internally rotate the femur or use our foot as an authentic driver and step 45 degrees inward while we rotate outward. That will create a greater load into the rear butt, making that region much stronger. So that's what this looks like. Okay, now let's turn it into a matrix. So we're going to go forward, sideways, and rotate at 135 degrees. So going forward, back, sideways, 135. Okay, now I'm going to turn the foot in. It's 1, turn it in. 2, turn the foot in. 3. So, wow, that felt good actually. Really felt good on my sacrum. So, what I want you to try out is to go ahead and do this matrix where you go forward, sideways, and rotate at 135. But I want your upper body to go at a nice steady pace. Try not to step and then just move your arms slowly. Let them flow freely to your own personal endpoint. Some will have an endpoint to here, some will have an endpoint all the way back here, but let your body do what it naturally does. Move. And as we do this and develop the habits, and we do it consistently over time, you will notice that you become much more fluid with that movement. And by having more internal rotation, when you're walking, your body will begin to feel a lot more freer and a little bit more fluid. Now, don't forget, you have your left side to do as well. So go ahead and create, I would say 3 to 5 cycles of going forward, sideways, 135, and then doing the same thing on the opposite side. Okay? All right. Hopefully that made a lot of sense and you got a lot out of it. You now have a basic understanding of real and relative motion and the benefits that it delivers to your body. And what we are working towards achieving through this channel, what I'm working to gift you with based on what I do for myself. So I'm just sharing what I do for myself so that you can benefit, or at least one person can benefit. And if you need to train with me, you still can. The gyms aren't open, but I've created a new service called telecoach.me. And if you need to train with me, or you would like to train with me for the first time, then let me know. Okay, contact me and I will explain the program to you. The sessions are each in 15-minute increments, so you can go one segment of 15 minutes and increment to the next. up to a full hour. And that's how they're paid for, in 15-minute increments. All right, so I don't want to go into details with that because it's going to make this video too long. But what I want to say to you is that if no one has told you this morning that they appreciate you, then I want you to know that I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this video. Okay? Have an excellent day and a great week, or a great day and excellent week. You know what I mean? Enjoy, and we will connect next week and continue with the hip. All right. Thank you for watching. Ciao.